Baby, please, let me redeem myself. I'm sorry, were my words to my husband that night when he decided to step out of our marital bedroom. My name is Susan. I am an unfaithful, unscrupulous, indecent woman. Yes, I know all of that. But before I give you the chance to call me all those names, let me explain how I got into this situation. Before we continue with the story, do not forget to click on the notification button in order to get notified at every new video posted. Thank you. Edgar, my husband, married me during a great economic crisis. Things were extremely difficult during this period. The celebration of our wedding was affected by it, since because of the limited budget, we were forced to have a tiny ceremony instead of the big wedding we dreamed of. I remember during this time, Edgar, my husband, had seen his salary cut in half. At the time, he still held the position of accountant in a small local private company. I did not yet have a source of income since I had just left training school, so we were obliged to maintain a traditional relationship as a couple. While my husband went to work in the morning, I stayed at home doing the household chores. Despite everything, we were in harmony and we were happy. To earn some money, I ended up opening a small kiosk in front of our house to sell basic necessities in the neighborhood. But because of the loans I granted, I had to close after a few months. Then I realized that small business is not for me. A year passed until the economic crisis finally ended. Edgar was back to receiving his basic salaries of 500,000 francs. His pay raise automatically meant that our life was going to change at home, so I could only be happy for my husband and I. No more stuffy meals without flavor. Now we would be able to eat food like chicken and meat that I had forgotten in our menus because it was so expensive. At the start, my dear and tender husband showered me with gifts whose pleasures we could no more afford before. Now I had the opportunity to do my manicure and pedicure every month. He offered me hairstyles that he dreamed of seeing me wear. He liked to see me with long extensions which fell on my shoulders. According to him, it was more feminine. And then we were also entitled to go to a restaurant twice a month alone. These little pleasures in life had succeeded in making our life as a couple more pleasant. It was exactly the life I dreamt of. However, I also wanted to have a profession in the aim of making our life even more pleasant with my income added to that of my husband. But Edgar had categorically refused, making me understand that he was in the middle of a training for a higher position and that it was going to be totally useless for me to have a job since the income was going to increase. Plus, we were planning to conceive our first baby, so I was going to need to stay at home a little longer. I accepted without hesitation because I thought that his way of thinking was logical. Besides, I didn't complain about taking care of the house and my husband full time. Plus, I had everything I needed. The bills were paid, my needs were paid for. What more could I ask for? 6 months later, Edgar completed his refresher training and had finally been able to access to the position of financial controller at the Ministry of Finance. It was such a dream come true. My husband no longer depended on the meager quotas given to him by his department manager. Not only he became a bit like a superior because he controlled all their financial inflows and outflows, but also he now benefited from missions outside the city and sometimes out of the country, giving him access to extremely juicy bonuses. My God, a dream of a lifetime. So I rushed to propose to him the project of saving to be able to have a house worthy of his rank, and he automatically accepted. But it also meant that he was going to spend more time at work in order to be able to save this money, which was going to be used to buy us a new house. By the way, he offered me a Mercedes with which I could go around the city. I was no longer anybody, you know. Luxury started coming in. Wads of cash flowing in and out of the house in armored suitcases. I was certainly pleased, but my husband's absence from the house was becoming longer and longer. At the start, I understood that his new position required a lot of his time, in addition to the house project which required a lot of finance, which is why he had to be absent more than usual. I held on as a good wife, but the more the months passed, the less I saw my husband at home. And the height of it all was the fact that at some point he began to become more and more distant towards me. My husband and I had less intimacy together. Every time I tried to touch him, he pretended to be tired from work. I was frustrated, but I held on. Months passed, and it was no longer just fatigue that Edgar took on me as an excuse to be absent and emotionally cold. Edgar started making mistakes on his clothes. In the morning, he went out with a white shirt and came back in the evening with a blue shirt without his tie. Sometimes it was his socks that were mismatched or his underwear. When I asked him questions, he replied that he had bought lots of clothes that he kept at his office in case of surprise meetings or for occasions of extreme emergency. I accepted without saying anything. The day he planted the first step was when he came back drunk at 4 a.m. on a Saturday. After leaving for work early the previous morning, I was pissed off, but it was totally impossible to convey my displeasure to him because he couldn't even express himself clearly. So, like a good wife that I was, I helped him undress and go to bed. While trying to collect his stuff, which he had abandoned on the ground, I found in the pocket of his pants some feminine underwear. In jealousy and panic, I went to his cell phone and checked his call list. I came across the number of a certain Ornella who had called him the day before at 11 a.m. I continued my search in his message list and I read his conversations with the said girl, and I discovered that he was having an affair with her. He even paid for a studio apartment in town in which she lived. The next morning I told him about the discovery and we had a violent argument. I was ready to leave, but in the end he begged me. He really begged me to stay. He explained to me that the loneliness at work had misled him and that he would never do it again. I forgave him. To make it up, he bought me a new car. We were both happy. A few months after that, we received good news. I finally had gotten pregnant. My husband was over the moon and showered me with gifts and lots of money. He kept an eye on things and my prenatal consultations were done exclusively in Paris. He had made an appointment at the Bichat-Claude Bernard Hospital. Moreover, the payment of plane tickets were not a problem. He had the means. When the time came, I had to give birth, so Edgar insisted that I go and give birth to our son with a doctor who followed me up in Paris. In addition, it was going to be an opportunity to give our son the possibility of a French nationality. I didn't find any downside to it. I went there and I gave birth to our little Matthias, the happiest event of my life. Unfortunately, my husband could not come to join me. Apparently, work gave him no time to rest. On top of that, he had to stay in charge of the construction site of our new house. So instead of my mom had to come help me. Moreover, who else but the mother to be at the side of a woman who just gave life? I stayed in Paris for 3 months until the baby was strong enough to take a flight. When I returned home, I noticed that my husband had rather a strange attitude. He didn't touch me. Initially, I thought it's because he was afraid of hurting me because of my postpartum condition, so I didn't complain. On the other hand, he was very caring and loving with our son, so I had no reason to worry. I endured the emotional distance between my husband and I until our son was 7 months old. I hired a detective to follow him in every move since he had started coding his phone. After 3 weeks of investigations, I discovered that my husband had 2 new conquests in addition to the famous Ornella with whom the adventure had not stopped. Because of the first discovery, my heart had hardened a little. I didn't make a fuss out of it. I remained zen. He lived his life. During this time, I took care of our baby. When Matthias was 1 year old, I told my husband that I wanted to start working again. He wanted to deny me this right, but I insisted, and he ended up accepting. So I also trained as an accountant. I applied everywhere, and in the end I was accepted at the Ministry of Finance, where my husband worked. Since I am a friendly and sociable person, I easily linked up with the Director of Cabinet of the ministry, which in a way has the same level of responsibility as my dear and loving husband. Over time, we got closer to the point where we maintained a much more than professional relationship. Yes, I cheated on him. 2 weeks ago, my husband found out about my affair with his colleague through little gossip in the office. He came to confront me about it, and I confessed what I had done. He flew into a rage and since refused to forgive me. Is it fair? Yet I forgave him all his infidelities.